I'm Neil from the Starling Tribune, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the one you're listening to now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual host. Check out all the other great podcasts at gonnageek.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to episode 76 of Better Podcasting. On today's show, we're going to talk about ways to prepare if you're in a presentation role at an event.
In this week's Better Podcasting download, we're going to give you all of the details on the podcast consumer survey.
And finally, in our Better Podback, we'll talk to you about your experience with attending conventions related to your podcast.
Episode 76 of Better Podcasting starts now.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your host for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to episode number 76 of Better Podcasting. I am Stephen John Drew, and I am reunited after he went away for a while with Stargate Pioneer.
And it feels so good, doesn't it, Steven? Hello, I'm SP. Welcome to Better Podcasting. We got a great show for you tonight. It's absolutely fantastic being back in the studio, and I can't wait to get through this episode. It's going to be a fun time, Steven.
You know what?
What?
I actually recorded an episode while you were away for a weekend. I recorded without you, and I couldn't do it, so I hit delete.
Recorded without me? That's a breach of contract. It's either supposed to be us or me. There's no just Steven.
No, I'm just kidding. By the way, if you didn't catch, SP was away talking podcast stuff, and maybe we'll talk about that next episode a little bit. But yes, we are here today with another edition of your favorite hobby podcast on Hobby Podcasting. This is Better Podcasting, and we have a whole bunch of fun in store today. It's jam-packed, so we'll just go ahead and get into the main topic after we solicit your feedback. That's right. We want to solicit your feedback, and we want to ask you to tell us a little bit about how you saved your podcast. Now, what do I mean by this? What I mean is that if something went wrong with your podcast, that's right, could be anything, could be small, could be big. We want to know, what did you do to save your podcast? And why are we asking that?
Steven.
Yes.
I've got a story on how I saved my podcast.
Well, we'll get to you in a minute, Stargate Pioneer, because first I want to promote the segment. And what I want to do is tell everybody, we want to know what you did to save your podcast, and then we can share it on this very program so that people can learn, just like Stargate Pioneer wants to do right now.
That's right. So last week with Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast, I usually record on OBS. So we're streaming live on YouTube Live, and I record the video on OBS Studio. I'm doing a screen capture. I do an overlay. It looks really neat. The graphics provided by Steven and our fair artist of the network that has provided them. So it was going great. We actually had a great episode. I didn't have any edit points video-wise at all. And I get to the end, and I look to stop. It's not there. I was devastated. It wasn't recorded. But wait, it was, because it was streaming to YouTube Live and it was recorded there. So I had to wait for the file to come to be processed. I downloaded it, and then I went into my video editing software and I used that video instead. But wait, Stephen, there was one more step that needed to happen.
What happened?
Well, because of the way things work, in order for my mic flag to be seen correctly, I have to mirror my camera, which live, it looks like I'm backwards, but I'm really not on the recording. But in this case, I was using the backup recording, so my mic flag was backwards, so I had to go into the video editing software and flip it around.
But what about your co-hosts? Wouldn't they have been backwards?
Flipped. Yes, they were.
Because they didn't have any tells, right? Because their
That's
frame,
right.
there was nothing on there. So what we learned from SP's story is, number one, it's amazing how much a backup recording can save you. Secondly, mic flags are just, they look cool, but they're not going to help you. That's what SP is trying to tell you.
That's right. They're your absolute antithesis when it comes to the background backup recording when you have mirrored yourself to begin with. So yeah, we're going to have to work on that for SP in the future. But in the meantime, I was able to save my video portion of my podcast. And that is the sort of information we're looking for in our How I Saved My Podcast segment.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think that it's a great learning story for everybody. And I think that that's a great example on how even the great Stargate pioneer runs into troubles.
Genuine Stargate pioneer. Genuine. We went from golden to genuine. I'm not going to great. We're stopping at genuine.
Okay, well, I think that we should just talk about what other people have to say, because let's be honest here. We can only take so much SP and Steven stories, right?
Yeah, I like other people's stories. I like story time with other people. It's fun. It's entertaining. I like it. So please get in your How I Saved My Podcast story.
Yeah, please send that. You can send that any of the ways that you can reach us on Twitter or Facebook, or just go to betterpodcasting.com. Send it to us. Email it. You can send us a wave. You can send us a video. We don't care. Whatever format you want, let us know. In fact, our number one recommended format is to track SP down at an event and demand that he records it right there, even if he has nothing on him. Say, I want you to record this right now.
Right after they ask for my autograph, and they give me $10 for said autograph.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on.
Our main topic today, we are going to be talking about, so you're at an event and all of the eyes are going to be upon you. Why is that? It's because you're presenting at the event, but you find yourself a bit torn because on one hand, now you're acting in presentation capability. You are presenting, it could be running a booth, it could be presenting at a panel, you could be speaking on a topic. In any case, eyes are on you. Eyes are on you. You want to make sure to represent yourself well. But on the other hand, you want to be greedy. This is the perfect way to leverage your podcast. And today we want to talk to you about some ways that you can maximize this greed. No, maximize this opportunity is what we're talking about. So as mentioned last time, we're not giving a Toastmasters level advice here, but we are talking about the bigger picture, the more podcast related details.
Yeah, and we have a bit of experience in this. SP has conducted a couple of events now, and I have helped orchestrate a couple of events, and we used to run some different podcasts where there were events and I was involved with the planning. So we know a little bit about this. Now, here's the thing that we want to first highlight. Just like last time, every scenario is going to be different. Every scenario is going to be different. So just like we said last time, you're going to want to think this through. What are your ambitions for this event? For example, are you just wanting to make some form of material for your podcast that you're wanting to actually go ahead and just promote it a little bit? Or are you wanting to come back with something that you can use on your podcast? And that's going to really set your direction on where your focus is going to be. Because if you're overall just wanting to make connections and things like that through this, but not necessarily bring back audio or content like that for your podcast, well, then it's a lot simpler. Now, if you are wanting to bring something in, then you're going to want to think a little bit about some of the stuff we mentioned last time and ways that you can capture that audio. And we're not going to reiterate that. But number one, start by thinking, what do I want to accomplish both with what's happening at the event and back for my podcast? And that's going to help set you down the right path on where you want to go.
Yeah, in any case, since you'll be in front of people, it's important to remember that everything you do is a potential advertisement or like a detriment for your show, depending on if it goes well or not. Let's face it, sometimes it doesn't go that great. So when you introduce yourself, try to work in your podcast. You don't want to seem over spammy, but you want to at least mention, hey, I'm so-and-so from such and such a show, your hobbypodcast.com. Your best attention will be right at the start when you're talking to somebody, and the people that are at the event that are related to your genre. So they are your target audience, is basically what I'm trying to say. Sometimes it simply takes I do a weekly podcast called Better Podcasting, which talks about hobby podcasting, to get somebody to write it down or subscribe or hand them a business card. But you can also generate some interest points to your subject matter to bait people, right, Stephen?
Yeah, and an example of that would be, let's say that you're asked a question, and this could be a matter of you're actually in a presentation scenario, or you're just at a booth and people are coming up to you. You might be asked a question about the subject material of your podcast. Well, if you've got a way that you can integrate that into the answer, subtly, as SP said, then that can go a long way. It could just be a matter of saying, yeah, actually, you know what? To answer that question, we actually, here's the answer, talk about the answer. And if you want to hear a little bit more, I actually have an episode there that you can take a listen to. We talked about that on the show. Or even just casually, yeah, I actually did a bit of an interview with blah, 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 blah. And that can also hook them in. So keep that in mind when you are in this role. Maybe there is a way that you can subtly mention your podcast and interest them to find out more. Now, here's a great tip with that. You could build up a potential listener by following up the question later. And what I mean by that is, if somebody has a question and you covered it on an episode, you probably don't know all of your episode numbers off the top of your head. I know what topics we've talked about on Better Podcasting. I couldn't tell you the episode number, but what I could do is say, yeah, we actually had an episode where we covered that, and I don't know the episode number, but if I get your card, what I'll do is after this event, I'll go ahead and send you an email with that. And so now, later, you're going to send them a follow-up, you're making this connection, and you're reminding them about your show a little bit later, and best of all, you are giving them the answer that they came to you to ask you about, so or with the question they came to ask you about. So absolutely, you can leverage that to really remind them that, hey, I've got a podcast, here you go, as long as you're willing to spend the time afterwards.
Yeah, just remember, whenever you're dropping information like a 411 about your podcast, make sure it's relevant and also in a manner that's appropriate. Basically, if you do too much, it comes off as a cheap used car salesperson. You don't want to do that. You want to come off as an expert, not as a salesman. And one thing that's easy to forget about is that where you are talking to people who are in your target demographic, this means they also know a lot about your subject material to a degree. Sometimes they're just fans, sometimes they're experts, but in any case, they will know enough that they are judging you.
Yes, and that's an important thing to remember, because again, we're talking today about you being at some form of event that is to do with your podcast. We're not talking about being at a podcasting event. And because of this, these are people that share that interest with you. For example, if I was doing a woodworking podcast and I went to a woodworking event and I was talking at a woodworking event, the odds are I'm talking to people who like woodworking. It's probably not somebody showing up to a woodworking event that just kind of stumbled into it. No, they probably have a bit of passion about it, so they know some things. So because they are judging you, it's important to make sure that you represent yourself exactly like you want to be seen. If you go and you BS your way through an answer and it comes off as you BSing your way through an answer, they're going to go, hey, Steven, you're a BSer and I don't want to know anything more from you because all of your information is BS. And usually that's what people do say to me. They go, Steven, you're a BSer. I don't want to listen to you. That's why I listen to Stargate Pioneer.
Just stumbling into a woodworking convention, that stinks of like a bachelor party gone wrong. I went to the bar with my buddies. We had a few drinks. I crossed the border into Tijuana, and then all of a sudden I find myself at a woodworking conference the next morning. Not that there's anything wrong with woodworking conferences, but just the way you phrase that was funny. Yeah, sure. They'll be able to tell if you're BSing or not, specifically if you have any underwear on your person or not. I mean, coming from a bachelor party to a woodworking convention. On the other hand, if you say something fresh or lively, it might entice them to check out your podcast more. Say there's some insight that you've come up with on your podcast or some interview that you've done, like on Voices of Defiance. I interviewed the showrunner, Kevin Murphy. That is always a conversation piece when it comes to Defiance. So as somebody who's speaking to potential listeners, if you want to appeal to them, you want them to know more about you. So you entice them with little teasers along the way, little bits of interest, which might get them to check out your show.
Yeah, and just keep that in mind. You want to have that good balance. You want to entice them and you want to show that you're knowledgeable. Because the thing is, if you don't come off knowledgeable and you're doing a podcast on the subject matter, then why do they want to listen to that, right? Maybe you're so captivating that they want to hear more. Okay, that could potentially be. But the thing is, you just need to have that balance. Interest them, make them want to hear more, but also make sure that you do present yourself in a manner that is respectable. Now, one of the last things that we want to talk about, which will take a little bit to go through here, is we mentioned this. The eyes are on you. We've talked about that. Whether you're at a booth, people coming up to you, or you're in front of a room running a panel, the eyes are on you. Or you're actually on a stage somewhere talking about how fantastic it is to have a bachelor party that ends up at a woodworking convention. The eyes are on you. And what can you do to help maximize your brand? Simple. Material. You can promote your brand through material. Now, we recognize that you are a hobby podcaster, but we want to list a bunch of ideas that are very attainable for you. And again, you are probably, if you're at an event, full or surrounded by a bunch of other people who are trying to get that attention of the convention goer or the event goer. And you want to make sure that people have something reminding them about your show. And here's one really easy way to do. And at first, a lot of people, when they hear this, they go, no, that's expensive. Well, it's not. T-shirts or polo shirts. There are a ton of different places that you can get them printed relatively cheaply. I've got a fair share myself of Gonna Geek shirts because it's fun for me. I like that. I can wear them on the show. If I go somewhere, I can wear them. And they are relatively inexpensive. And there's sales that come up all the time. I'll tell you that there's a couple of the main names, Vistaprint, Zazzle, Cafe Press. Those ones there are some main ones where you can just do single print items. And so you don't need to buy 300 t-shirts. No, you don't need to buy 300 t-shirts. You can buy yourself just one and get that made for the event, or a polo shirt. That's absolutely one way that you can promote your brand, because you're sitting there talking and you got a shirt on saying your podcast name.
Right. And one of the things about shirts, by the way, especially if you've applied and achieved like a media pass, it does give you extra credentials just by the fact that you're unifying your brand. Now, maybe you have a media pass that says what network you're from, maybe not, but your shirt definitely gives you something that people will ask, hey, what is that? It sounds neat. I don't know what it is. In our case, it would be Gonna Geek. It would be some sort of Gonna Geek or better podcasting branding. And that's what we would have on the shirts. And they're just fun to wear at conventions. Everybody's wearing geek cred anyway at the places that we go to. If you go to I'll just continue the use here, the woodworking conference, then everybody's going to have like their favorite woodworking shop on there. They're going to have some branding available. Take a look at Deadliest Catch, right? Or any fishing tournament. They're going to have Bass Pro boat stuff on. They're going to have Lund stuff, or they're going to have some fishing industry stuff on there. So it's just part of being part of the game. Racing, go to a NASCAR event. It's tons of branding there, tons of shirts, and people look at what you have on and they look to see what sort of tribe that you're with. Let's say NASCAR, if you're a fan of one driver versus another, and I'm going to keep everything nameless because I don't want to piss off any specific NASCAR race car fan here. But if you're the ardent fan of one particular driver who tends to just be very sure of himself, let's put it that way, or herself, then you've got that as well. In our case as well, if you're sponsored by an organization, it'd be nice to have something to sponsor, to show your sponsorship as well. Like, for instance, we're not sponsored by anybody, but for instance, it'd be nice to have something that's like Gonna Geek, sponsored by hover.com.
Wow. I'm surprised you didn't talk about a GMC Sierra. By the way, for those of you who don't get that reference, SP likes to drop that on the GonnaGeek.com show all the time as a bit of a joke, but I think secretly he is trying to get a GMC sponsorship. But, that's not going to happen because we're just lowly hobby podcasters.
Don't burst my bubble, Steven.
What else might you want to do? Well, here's one that is, again, at first you think it's very expensive, but pay attention. You find the right deals. And this is something that SP has 3 times, if not 4, I'm trying to think here, used this product. It is a banner. That's right. You could get yourself a banner. And especially if you're like running a booth or something, just have it behind you because you're going to have your attention focused on one person if you're in a booth. Super important to remember that. You're going to be building connections individually and you have all these other people walking by you and they're not getting to hear you plug yourself. But if you got a banner sitting there, guess what they're going to see? Your banner. And there you go. That's a potential listener. So absolutely, you can make yourself a banner. And like I said, SP has experience with this. So SP, what would you say makes a good banner?
I would say something that is versatile for the size of the space that you're going to be in. So you have to look at sizing. And since we do hobby podcasting, we never know where we're going to be at. So something that's as large as a torso, basically, that you can put behind you is probably pretty good. But you can make them too cluttered. So don't make them cluttered. Make sure that they say your branding and a few things about your branding and keep them at like that, because if it gets too busy, people aren't going to be looking at them. And make it clear of what you want them to go. If you want them to go to your podcast, if you want them to go to your website, if you want them to go to your sponsor, make it clear on the banner. And yes, Steven, let me just go through the ways that I've used our banner. So I have used it at C2E2. I have used it on a boat. I have used it in a hotel room. I have used it in on a rest area, in a freeway rest area. So those are at least 4 different ways that I've used them. And I have always framed the shot to make sure that banner can be read and seen. So it is very important to also frame the shot. If you're taking video or photos, make sure you frame it appropriately. And that's a good test, by the way, is before you actually start speaking or whatever, if you can take a step back and take a photo of the area, you can see how it is framed in the area. See if it's legible, see if it's visible, see if it makes sense where it's at.
Yeah, so absolutely, that's something that you could do there. And you know what? When it's all said and done, you can take it on home. You can put it behind you, behind your bed when you sleep at night and sleep next to your brand.
Or you can roll it up and put it in the bag in the corner.
You don't put it next to your bed?
No.
Oh, that's reserved for the RE320. I gotcha. Okay, so what else might you want to do? Here's one, promotional items. Because again, we're assuming that you're in some form of speaking role during this episode, and you're going to have people who might want to take something away. Now, this is, out of everything we're talking about today, this is the big, I'm going to say, expensive area, because anytime you're giving anything away, it's not necessarily going to yield the return of the investment. You might get a couple of people, but it's important to remember that a lot of times when anybody gets something, just goes in there with a stack of other merch. But I want to give you an example of this. On the network, we've got Game Life Balance US. They are our lifestyle podcast on the Gonna Geek Network, but they used to be a gaming podcast, a video game podcast. And they went to a convention, and what they did was they found a very affordable way to print up pens. And so they just got fairly inexpensive pens that had their brand and their website on there. And they said it actually worked out pretty well, that they had people who did come to their show and thank them for the pen. So apparently it did work and get some people. Now, here's the thing. You might give out 300 pens and might only get like 10 people, if that, checking out your show. So again, anytime you give anything away, you want to remember that there's a good chance it's just going in a bag full of other merch.
That's right. And if it's something useful, that's always helpful as well. I know that people have done those cozies to hold their beverage, whether it's adult or not. I don't care. You hold their beverage. That is also something that people have done for a while. What we did last year, by the way, is we did a leather embossed coasters. And these are really cool because we were giving these away to other podcasters. And one of the things that you want to do when you podcast is you want to have a cup of water next to you. And when you have a cup of water on your table and you have a microphone, when you put that cup of water down, it might click the desk. So we thought this was really cool as to act as a shock absorber for that noise. And it also looks really cool with our brand on it as well. And we gave that away last year. And I elected not to do that this year at Indiana Comic Con, but I elected to give away business cards and only business cards. I did that for a reason. I wanted to know who was serious in the room and who wasn't. And I have to tell you, everybody in the room came up to me afterwards and asked for a business card. So that was awesome to be able to give those away. We have other opportunities coming up for the rest of the year. Stay tuned for what we decide to give away there. But there's just a variety of different things you can give away. Stickers is cheap, inexpensive. Of course, there are people out there that could care less about stickers. There are people that love stickers, to put them on your car, put it on their laptop. Some people even put them on their microphone, but no, not me.
And SP mentioned it, the business cards. The business card is really the ultimate thing that we want to say here to close up sort of the merch and the physical items talk, because the business cards serve so many purposes. If there's one thing you're going to do, we recommend getting yourself some business cards because they are very, very, again, inexpensive. You can find all sorts of deals on the internet, especially if you've never ordered from websites before. So absolutely, we encourage you to do that because they have your contact information on you. And this is actually something that we wanted to mention this episode because we figured it felt better in this episode. But any event that you're going to that is related to your podcast, even if you're not presenting, it's a good idea to get yourself some business cards made with your information because it's so quick. All you got to do is just flip them a business card. If somebody's asking about your podcast, conversations come up. Super easy for them to get that. And they've now got a physical object that they can go back and reference later because people who you're meeting the first time, even if you're sure that they understood what you said in 5 minutes, there's a good chance they're going to forget about that and be going, was it Better Podcasting or was it Hobby Podcast? What was their website, right? They're going to forget, especially if you're, like myself and unmemorable. So that's absolutely something that I encourage you to do is get a business card. Now, while some people will encourage you to print both sides, if you've got multiple podcasts, put each podcast on each side. SP, his experience has been a little contrary to that, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't print something on both sides. I would leave the backside so that the person that's receiving it can put the date, the time, the place that they received it. So that's what I like to receive business cards at, is to leave that backside for important information. Like Stephen was talking earlier in this podcast about wanting the contact information to tell somebody what show to go to, for example. There is one particular show that I have told a lot of people to go to because there's a lot of questions about it. And it is the episode that we did on self-hosting and the pros and cons between self-hosting and media hosting. I know what episode number that is. It's Better Podcasting episode 65. So if they ask me that question, I can put that on the back of the card so they know that right away. So there's just all sorts of uses that you can have for that.
Yeah, and I will say, I actually, because of where I live in Western Canada. There is not a ton of conventions that are related to the things that I do that I'm able to go to, but I still had myself printed business cards because there was, again, a sale that came up for like $10. I got myself way too many business cards And now when I am in a situation that I need to share that, I have them on me. So we encourage you to get that if you're going to anywhere where you might find yourself promoting your podcast potentially. Now, we've talked a lot about different ways that you can maximize going to an event. And we know what you're saying. You're saying, SP, I totally understand what you're saying, but I pretty much tuned out Steven. So don't take our word for it. We've got a very wonderful clip, and there's a reason why we used all these woodworking convention examples was because Dyami Plotke was on our mind because he sent us a fantastic recap and some advice that he has based off of his events or his attending different woodworking conventions. So let's go ahead and turn it over to Dyami here to tell you all about his experience.
Hello, Stephen, SP, and the better podcasting audience. I'm Dyami Plotke of the Modern Woodworkers Association. I'm a hobby podcaster about woodworking. I wanted to talk about how to become involved in an event that ties in to the subject of your podcast. As I record this, it's the eve of my leaving to attend a woodworking conference where I've been invited to come on behalf of the conference sponsors, in this case, a magazine. And I'll actually be working some of the social media for the sponsors at the event. And I'll be getting tons of recording and coming back with lots of good audio for what I would expect to be 2 or 3 episodes of my podcast. And at least personally, this is the 5th or 6th woodworking conference I've gone to where I've been invited to come by the conference attendees. But how do you get to this point? For me, and what I think is true for most people who are in this position, is it's about community. I'll use woodworking as the example, but there's community around all of the different hobbies that we podcast about or the different topics we podcast about. So if you want to be involved in an event related to the topic of your podcast, you need to belong to the community that's around that topic. And if you have a podcast about it, I'm assuming you do belong to the community. But that's important, is to be an active community member. And as part of that, you should have friendly and supportive contact with the people who run the events and encourage people to attend the events, talk about the events the first couple times. Absolutely, you should go on your own dime and understand what it's about. You can't just start up a show and say, oh, you have this event, why don't you, sponsor me to come to the event? It doesn't work that way. You need to establish yourself and establish a rapport with the event. But by maintaining yourself in the community and talking to attendees, talking with the people who run it, you establish yourself as a credible voice in the community. And then, of course, as the events are coming out, provided it's an event that you genuinely support, I wouldn't say to do this just to get invited to the events. It needs to be an event that you genuinely support. Invite the event sponsors onto your show to talk about the event and help promote it. Because even if you're not going, even if they're not covering your entry, if it's an event that is truly beneficial to the community around whatever topic you're talking about, it's worth discussing, and it's just good content to have on the podcast. So I absolutely recommend bringing people who are running the event on. They'll be happy to talk about their event. And then from there, it's a very gentle push to get invited. I'll be honest, the conferences that I've been invited to attend, I've paid for a couple of them myself, and then from that point, establish rapport with the people who run it, and was invited to come as a quote-unquote media. And the same has been true of 3 other woodworking conferences that all occur on different intervals. Once I get invited once, what I will always do is the next year, as soon as they announce the conference, I will email the person running the conference. And I'll say, look, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I also don't want to buy a ticket and then not be able to return it after you offer me a press pass or a media pass. So once I've been invited the first time, I always reach out to the people the next year and say, would you mind letting me know if I'm going to get a media pass, because I don't want to buy a pass and then have to return it. I've never been told no to that. So I find that's a very successful means of staying invited once you're there. And then, of course, when you're there, understand what the show is about. Don't be selfish and just try to promote your own podcast. If they've invited you to be there, they're inviting you to promote their event. And you can do both simultaneously. It's not an either or, but don't forget that you're there at their event and try to support their event. I was at an event a couple years ago where another group of woodworkers came and didn't do anything to promote the event, simply told people to come to see them. And they were not welcome back the next year because they didn't do anything to support the overall event. So understand, who you're there supporting. You're there to get content for your own listeners, to support the entire community that's around whatever the event is. And if the event has invited you to come, then, make up for it and make sure that you do something to support the event. So hopefully that helps all of you who are interested in connecting and being involved with events that tie in to the subjects of your podcasts. Again, what it really comes down to is community, community, community. So make sure that you're involved in the community that exists around whatever your topic is. I hope that's helpful. And SP and Steven, keep up the good work. I love the show.
That was great, Dyami. Thank you very much for laying down all that knowledge. The media pass or press pass, once you've gotten one, and then when the event's coming up again and you don't know if you should buy one or not, that's a great way to slip it into, hey, I don't know if you're going to give me a pass next year or not. So that's also I know some people that apply to be speakers at events as well, because speakers generally get free passes as well. They try to use that as leverage. It doesn't work so well for that, but for media press passes, on the other hand, it would. And I might add, I am very impressed. You are the social media presence for those conferences, that you are part of the conference at that point. That is awesome.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure that we included this because, again, we've talked a lot about this, and I know a lot of people hearing this, especially people who are brand new into their podcast, probably thought, well, what sort of capability am I going to have to be at an event and represent myself? Like, I barely started my podcast. I think Dyami is a fantastic example on how different conventions and events can integrate with your podcast, because as he said, he is a hobby podcaster, and that is what he is. And he has talked about how he is here representing his podcast at woodworking events. So whether you are attending an event because you've planned to, or because you have ended up having a bachelor party go wrong, make sure that you prepare to represent yourself.
Represent yourhobbypodcast.com. Thank you very much, Dyami. We really appreciate it.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today. Come back next week when we wrap up this arc with some interesting knowledge from the great, the wonderful, the one and only, I don't remember his title, Stargate Pioneer.
Genuine.
It's
genuine.
Sorry.
And you're the one who came up with it. A genuine Stargate Pioneer.
Welcome to this week's Better Podcasting Download.
Since we recorded last time, there was an important announcement, and it came from the folks at Edison Research. They told us it was coming, and it actually arrived on time. And what we're talking about is the Podcast Consumer 2017 Survey Report. Now, 2,000 random people were surveyed for this. You could find this, all by the way, at edisonresearch.com. So 2,000 random people were surveyed over the telephone, and some key information out of that survey, and then we'll get to what it means for your hobby podcaster. So podcasting is exploding basically since 2006, tripling, or in some cases quadrupling in some statistical areas. And just give you an example, from 22% in 2006 that were aware of the term podcasting to a whopping 66% in 2017. That is a threefold increase right there. But wait, there's more. In 2006, 11% of people surveyed had ever listened to a podcast. In 2017, that number had increased to 40%. That's almost 4 times as much in 10 years. That's amazing. Now, some other specific stats that are important: 57% of podcast consumers have a 4-year college degree, some grad school or advanced degree. I'd kind of combine some responses there. 63% of podcast consumers are employed, or 12% are employed part-time. 49% of weekly podcast listeners listen to somewhere between 3 and 10 hours each week. 49, that's half the people that listen to podcasts a lot. The average number of podcasts listened to each week are 5. 77% of podcast consumers click on a podcast and listen immediately versus 67% download and listen later. Obviously, there's some overlap with that, but 77% click on a podcast and listen immediately. That's important. An average of 6 podcasts are subscribed to. Now, people listen via 58% on a PC and 42% of mobile back in 2013. That was 4 years ago. This year in 2017, 31% listen on a PC versus 58% in just 4 years. It's down almost half. And 69% listen via mobile in 2017. These numbers, by the way, match up with the statistics that Libsyn gives out on the feed all the time. 85% listen at home, 65% listen in a vehicle. Of course, this is overlapping stats, and this is people that have ever listened to a podcast. 47% download and listen within 24 hours. 19% download and listen within 48 hours. So basically the total, if somebody downloads your podcast, 66% of those people listen within 48 hours. The percent of all podcasts listened to. So this is combined. 55% of people listen to somewhere between 76% and 100% of the podcast. 15% listen to somewhere between half, 51% and 75%. So that means that for a total of 70% of those surveyed are listening to most or all of the podcast.
Which is crazy. That's crazy to me because we've heard so much about people just dropping off within a few minutes. And this is information that is saying contrary.
That's right. Some other information that was interesting is smart speaker ownership. So the Alexa, Google Home is very low. I mean, you're talking below 10% on the survey. So that's going to increase over time. But even though it was the hottest item last holiday season, I was surprised to see that number so low, but I guess that's what it is.
I have a theory on that, by the way. And here's my theory on that. And maybe this kind of lends to the rest of the points as well, but 2,000 people, that's not that many to possibly own smart speakers. Like I know when I go and I have myself an Amazon Echo, and people who come over to my house or I talk to about that are surprised I've got that. A lot of people I have to explain what it is, but to me, my circle of people don't own one. I'm the only one that has that, and I think that that's sort of the trend. Is more and more people are getting that, but the odds of somebody out of 2,000 people, the odds of any major number of people polled within that 2,000 owning a smart speaker when it seems like smart speakers themselves are fairly low. I think that it's not necessarily the easiest thing to get a good sample from. And what I really, really mean about that is because smart speakers are still fairly geeky things. Now, a lot of people who are listening to podcasts have been listening to for a while. And I think if you were to kind of do the reverse, this is my random theory. If you were to do the reverse, you might find there's more people using smart speakers than you would, like, out of the general podcast consumer samples, then this will leave you to believe, because I just think that the odds of polling 2,000 random people and them having a smart speaker is probably somewhat slim.
Well, that might be, and I'll have to go back and take a look at the sales numbers for these and find out how many they've sold versus what's the percentage of population that we have. So that'll be an interesting. And of course, people that own these devices, a lot own multiple devices like me. I own a main Echo and I own a little Dot. So there you go. So one last stat that I'll talk about that's out of this Edison research survey is people listen a lot to audio, an average of 4 hours of audio consumed a day. Now, it's not necessarily podcasting. It could be radio, could be streaming music, could be a lot of different things. But on average, people listen to 4 hours of audio consumed a day. So that's important to note. People are listening to audio anyway. So when they find podcasts, if they're interested to talk content, they can just roll into podcasts. So that's all great. So what are the implications for hobby podcasters? Okay, number one, more people than ever before are listening to podcasts. So my lesson from this is the time is right to create content for consumption. So if you haven't started your podcast, start it now. But you'll need to stand out in the crowd because it is a crowded field now. It's crowded, more crowded than it ever has before. But the time is right. Time is now. If you want to get out and have listeners, more people are listening than ever before. Right, Stephen?
Yeah. And the thing that you want to remember with this as well is that employed, educated people are listening to podcasts as well. This is the majority of the available audience you create your content for. And that's just by the statistics. You know, we're not trying to sound all judgy or anything, but that's something that's very important to remember. And the other thing as well is remember that people listen to your podcast within 48 hours. And if people download your podcast, the odds are they will listen to it right away. Now, what does that mean? Number one, that means make sure that if you are having timely content, you get it out right away because people are downloading it very quickly and they're listening to it right away. So you want to make sure that you do that. And the other thing is there's high engagement and promotion opportunities right within that first 48 hours. Now, I found this super fascinating because for years, SP, we've talked about it before on this. He's a big stats guy. SP loves him some stats. In fact, if you go and you check out his bed, while he does not have that Gonna Geek banner next to his bed sheets are actually printouts of stats. That's all that his bed sheets are, is their stats. And then next to the stats is RE320. That's the thing. But the stats are a big part of it. And he has been tracking for a long time the first 48 hours of his podcast release. And he's commented on this, that he has found the majority of his consumption is right away. And these statistics here correlate exactly with what he has been saying. So there you go. SP is right.
Well, what I've been tracking is the downloads for the first 2 days. I had no indication before this survey that most people were actually listening to those podcasts right when they downloaded them. So now the survey confirms it. And this just means that get out there and promote and engage with your audience. So promote your content, engage with your audience, make sure you're talking about the content. I know some people even have gone so far, we haven't talked about this at all on the show, but some people actually have listen parties or watch parties for their podcasts. They'll get out there and they'll run commentary of it. So not a lot of people do live shows. I mean, the percentage of live shows is very low. So if you have recorded your content and you produced your content, then a couple of days later, you can do you can MS3TK your own podcast. So that is actually kind of funny and fun, but to get your audience to be included in that, that's great. So just make sure that you are available for your audience. When your audience comments on your content, make sure that you engage with them because that is when they are interested in your content. Now, another thing that's important is that people that listen to a podcast or one podcast actually tend to listen to multiple podcasts. So here is where our little trick of being part of a network is our friend, because if they're listening to your content, they're generally going to be interested in other similar content. If you're part of a network that has a bunch of similar content on it, odds are people will at least pick up another show. So the cross promotion opportunities are very keen there. So one, be part of a network of similar content, and two, make sure you do that cross promotion.
And this goes right back to what we said a few episodes ago with making sure that you subtly promote any other projects that you do if you do launch another podcast, because people will like you. We talked about that. They will like you. And this is proof that they're listening to multiple podcasts and you've already got them listening to one. So are they going to put value in somebody's random podcast or somebody that they've already shown that they like? So keep that in mind. And the last thing that we want to talk about as well is that people listen on mobile devices and via click. Now, why is this important? Well, if people are exploring you, they probably are exploring you from a mobile device. So have a mobile website. Make it easy for people to find you. Super easy. You want to make sure that's super easy for your potential audience. And if you don't, they might get lost and give up. So have your quick subscribe links. Look into all of those things there because people are listening on mobile devices.
That's right. Make sure you have mobile-friendly websites. Make sure you are promoting on media links because mobile device, it's where most people engage on social media, by the way. So make sure that you are engaging people in manners that they can consume. Make sure you give them the links. Make sure you give them content in which they can view it. So that's all important stuff. So the 5 different things that we've covered that are important based off this survey for hobby podcasts. Number 1, the time is right to create content because more people are listening than ever before. Number 2, if you're creating content, the majority of people listening are employed, educated people. So make sure you make content that fits that genre of listener. Number 3, make sure you engage within 48 hours of releasing your content. Number 4, make sure you're cross-promoting with other like content or being part of a network because people are listening to multiple podcasts that listen to podcasts. And 5, make sure your stuff is mobile friendly. So there you go. Lots of great stuff because of this survey. And thank you very much to the Edison Research folks for making this public. They do so to help advertisers, let's face it. That's where they get their money from. Advertisers are very interested in this sort of thing, but we can use the information as well as hobby podcasters because they published it. So thank you very much, Edison Research.
All right. Well, that's enough about what the industry has to say about podcasting. What do you have to say about podcasting? Somebody got on the Better Podcasting Twitter. I don't know. Was it SP? Was it me? Was it just somebody who decided to believe that they were better podcasting? And with that belief came access to better podcasting? I don't know. Somebody did. And they asked, have you ever recorded a podcast from a live situation, such as at a convention or event? Whoever wrote this really knew what we were going to be talking about. That's right. We did ask that. And we had quite a bit of response on this here. And what we ended up getting, and we had some related responses as well. We had the story behind podcast. That name sounds so familiar, SP.
The Story Behind Pod. It's run by Emily Prokop.
Yes.
Who you might recall has been on this podcast talking about research and journalism. And by the way, this is a continuation from our feedback on this topic from last time around. And she got back with us after we recorded and she said, yep, I have a wine tasting. I had surprisingly good audio using an ATR 2100 plugged into my phone via XLR to 3.5 millimeter cable, as it is an unconventional way to use a ATR 2100. Usually when you're mobile like that into your phone, you will use it via USB, but no. She used XLR to 3.5 millimeter cable and got great audio. So good on you, Emily. And by the way, Emily, congratulations.
Yes.
You have had your baby, and we do congratulate you and can't wait till you're back live recording every week. She actually stacked up some episodes, by the way. So her podcast, The Story Behind, continues while she is on maternity leave. That is thinking ahead.
That's awesome. We had Kenneth say, sure, I have made many interviews and a few discussions in the field with a Zoom H1. Kenneth, Kenneth. Giving you one of these because I have been questioned many times about using my H1 on the road. Now, mind you, I use mine in a very complicated, ridiculous setup where I could pack way less cables if I would just invest in an actual XLR capable portable recorder. But I do use my Zoom H1 on the road, and I want to say I tip my hat to you, Kenneth. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Zoom makes the H1. It is simply an XY microphone capable recorder with a 3.5 millimeter in. Tascam makes a similar one, the DR05. I have seen both of them in use before. They are capable for what they are. They are XY mics, which are better suited for music in a room, by the way, than dedicated for audio, vocal audio for interviews. But if it's what you got, use it. And that is what Kenneth did. So way to go, Kenneth. You the man.
So thank you, everybody who did participate in that. And we also had another response. We had provided the following tweet, which was both Stargate Pioneer and Michelle Ely had a blast at their podcasting panels last weekend. Have you ever attended a podcasting panel? And we did have a response.
We did. Dyami the man. He said yes. Popular WIA had one a few years ago for woodworking bloggers and podcasters. It was fun. I'll bet it was fun because woodworking for years has been like a blog only or a magazine only sort of thing. And to have a podcast on it, that must actually, it might be fun. You know, for years, the television, New Yankee Workshop or Yankee Workshop was my exposure to woodworking, and having the podcasts available now. It's audio format, so it's not visual. Woodworking is very visual for me, but I would still like to learn a lot about the tools involved, whether they're mechanical or handheld tools, and how to use them correctly, how to plan your projects, how to sequence them, that sort of thing. That's all stuff that could be done with audio. So yeah, Dyami, that must have been fun and great. And I know woodworkers, they're a savvy bunch. That must have been very funny, actually. So good on you. I bet you had a great time. And by the way, if you have been to a podcasting panel at a non-podcasting event, please let us know. We'd love to hear where it was, how it went, and what was discussed, and what were the results, because that is great. And you can contact us on Better Podcasting on Facebook. That's Better Podcasting. On Twitter, we're at BetterPod. And you can always email podcast@betterpodcasting.com.
SP's partial to Facebook, though.
The Facebook doesn't like SP. I've been kicked out of better places, by the way, than the Facebook, so that's fine with me. For those of you that don't know, what Steven is making the joke out of is the Facebook kicked Stargate Pioneer off. So Stargate Pioneer is a little bitter at the Facebook for that, but...
What you get for posting those bachelor party pictures?
Right before the woodworking conference in Tijuana.
Yeah, but that is indeed the end of the show. Before we wrap up, we'll just take a moment here to remind you that we are part of the Gonna Geek Network, and there are a plethora of amazing geeky podcasts. If you're into anything geeky, and please do check them out. That's GonnaGeekNetwork.com. That's our home. That's where we hang out. Also hanging out, though, on the podcast forum. It's a new community that we built so that we can help share the knowledge that is podcasting in a very easy to index and search manner. And we think that a community forum is an ideal place for that. So please come over to the podcastforum.com. There's a lot of great chat happening right there.
And it's important to note that it is www.the.podcast forum. The is actually part of it. Like the Facebook, it's not part of Facebook anymore. With the podcast forum, it's part of the podcast forum.
I got to correct you because you keep saying but it is the podcast forum. And if you are old Englishy and you start typing the in there, it's not going to work for you. It's the podcast forum.
Go to your Canadian igloo and drink your Molson, sir.
But there you go. You've reached the end of episode 76 of Better Podcasting. I'm Stephen John Drew, sincerely thanking DMEpulaokey for his advice.
And I'm Stargate Pioneer saying thanks for dropping by. We have another great episode for you next week. We'll see you next week. Bye.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.